Setting up your webinar for Facebook Live. Okay, now we're streaming. So let me go ahead and get started. I think we are here. So thanks for everybody who joined and for everybody who will be watching our Facebook Live event. Yeah, again, thanks for joining us today. This is going to be a really important discussion as to why elections matter and why democracy is important and how veteran involvement can really protect the democracy here in the United States. And so throughout this year, as a result of COVID-19, our election infrastructure has never been more at risk. There's never been more of a need for us to stand up and protect the integrity of our elections from a meltdown. And it's as clear as it's ever been that each and every one of us needs to do our part to ensure the future of our republic. By protecting the election, veterans can help the democracy we've sworn to protect. Our speakers today will demonstrate why that's so important, how to do it, and why veterans know the importance of elections and democracy protection. And so I'm really proud to introduce our speakers that we have with us today. We have Melissa Hooper, who's Director of Foreign Policy at Human Rights First, who has been an advocate for human rights-based policy action globally with a specialization in Europe and Eurasia for over 10 years. We also have Kia Sims, an organizing manager at Fair Fight, which brings awareness to the public on election reform, advocates for election reform at all levels, and engages in other voting education programs and communications. And finally, we have Steve Miska, a retired colonel who served 25 years in the Army and 3 combat tours in Iraq. He currently serves as the executive director of First Amendment Voice, an organization that seeks to reinvigorate an appreciation for the principles espoused in the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. So let's go ahead and kick it off to Melissa. Melissa, I know you've done a lot of research into elections and democracy slide in other countries. And I was hoping you could just kind of speak to a little bit more about what that is and how it parallels to what we're seeing in the United States.
Sure. I'm really happy to. Thanks, Emily. I'm really happy to be participating today and to especially talk to veterans about these issues. As you all are leaders in your community, and I do think that it's important that veterans are speaking out to protect democracy right now ahead of the vote. So coming from my perspective, I've worked a lot in foreign countries, in particular authoritarian countries. So just want to highlight globally that there are a lot of people in the world who don't get a chance to vote. That, there are governments that are grabbing power without the vote. Sometimes you have particular groups that are disenfranchised. Actually, Switzerland didn't grant women the right to vote, a blanket right, until 1971. And then sometimes you have an entire population that is disenfranchised. You have rulers in some countries that remain in power until they resign or die. So for example, in Cameroon and Equatorial Guinea, you have 2 rulers who have been in power for over 40 years. So you haven't had a real vote to elect a new leader in over 40 years. And in Cambodia, you have Prime Minister Hun Sen, who's been in power almost that long, for 34 years. So you have a lot of dictators and a lot of authoritarians who are not having elections. Some do. And so what do those elections look like? Well, you have a lot of circumstances where authoritarians take over the institutions that control the election. So electoral commissions and bodies. There are often, you see the firing of all of the individuals that are independent from those bodies, and then, a packing of those bodies with people that are sympathetic to the ruling power. And I'm thinking of Russia. I worked a lot in Russia on this, on issues related, but you're also seeing some countries that are known as democratic, like Poland, doing something similar these days. You have a new body created by the Polish government that is a political body. There are no judges on this body, but it rules on all electoral cases. And so you unfortunately have a political body that's dealing with elections there. You also have circumstances where authoritarian governments just prevent those that would pose a real challenge from running. They put them in prison. That happens all the time. And then, there's the recent case of Alexei Navalny, who would be the one challenger to President Putin in Russia, who was recently poisoned. And I think it's interesting because Navalny would not be someone who would ever win an election, but the fact that he was even a challenger was enough to get his life in danger, put his life in danger. You also see greater use of independent monitors now. Political parties that are even small parties are training people to monitor elections. And the problem that you see in authoritarian countries is that there are ways to get around those monitors. Some countries have extended their elections to be more than one day, so they're 2 or 3 days, and a monitor has to sleep sometimes, or you just have people beating them up and physically removing them from the premises in some countries. And then finally, you see rulers using polarization to characterize independent monitors, to characterize political parties that are challenging the ruling party, or their supporters as traitors, as liars, as threats to the country, when what they're trying to do is hold their rulers accountable. And in recent cases, Belarus is one example, but you've also seen this in Venezuela. You do have leaders that just lie and say that they won the election when they didn't. So, these are the kinds of non-democratic examples we see, sort of the worst case scenario when applied to elections. But the funny thing is that these authoritarians are still holding elections. They still have them, even though they're completely false elections. Why do they do that? They do that because they want to look like a democracy. And they want to do that because democracies are prestigious and they're actually a better form of government. Democracies guarantee greater rights to their individual residents and citizens. And they tend to have lower rates of corruption. They're more peaceful. They don't fight with each other. And so it's just a better form of governance, and authoritarians want to look like that without actually being that. And so what are they missing? What is it that we have as democracies that they don't have? And that's trust. We have the trust in our processes that they will work for us. Even when we lose, we feel like it's a good process. We have a trust in information, and that the information that we get from our government entities and bodies, that it's true information and that it's based on facts and science. And then we have trust in the people that are making up our institutions, that they have the best interests of the country and the best interests of the institutions in mind, even if they think differently from us, that they are still trying to do their best. So, we are experiencing in the US some deterioration of that trust right now. And it's ahead of an election, a really important and defining institution for democracy. So as people who want to protect democracy, and especially as vets, what can we do and how can we support democracy at this time? I want to just offer 3 suggestions from someone who's worked a lot in authoritarian countries, how we can do our best. One is to recognize that just because an institution is known as a democratic institution, that doesn't mean that it has followed all the rules or that all of the information that it's coming out of it is reliable. I know this is intuitive, but to keep in mind that there may come a time when we need to question some of the decisions of our institutions. And so we need to be able to investigate ourselves and think about where we're getting our information and whether the information that's coming out of institutions is reliable. So we need to trust our guts, and we need to be on the lookout for information that seems unreliable. And then second, related to that, as vets, you are leaders in your community. So it's important that when you have reliable sources of information, when you have good information, share it. You're probably on social media. It's really important that you are sharing on social media now where to get reliable and good information. You know, there are a bunch of studies about this. One by Microsoft is in the US, but these studies have been done in Europe also, showing that ahead of elections on social media, people share more false information than true information. It's, you know, when you have a polarized body, you tend to see a lot of disinformation. So for you, sharing information, you know, where to register to vote, we seem to be at a deficit right now. We're 70% lower than we usually are in terms of those that have registered. The deadlines are next week. So getting information out to people about how to register, where to register. If you see disinformation online, debunking it and showing where people can get better information. And we all today will help try to point you toward some of those nonpartisan resources that can help people. I have my, you know, one recommended expert I would say is David Becker on Twitter, who's an elections expert, just talks about the process and where you can get good information. And then finally, I would say as leaders in your community, do your best to combat polarization, to de-escalate when you see there are, you know, partisan attacks or personal attacks, to try to cut through that, to prevent the attacks, but to provide information that is true and that is based on, you know, those entities that are reliable, and to try to, again, promote that feeling of trust in people and in processes, that even if we disagree with each other, we can work together to build and pull off a successful election. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, those are great points, Melissa. And it's so important to see why elections are just at the core of democracy and what happens when those can be eroded. And so what a scary but very important reminder. And then also as a reminder for all of those attending, if you want to use the Q&A session, we'll have a section for Q&A at the end. So please feel free to ask any questions and drop any thoughts or comments that you have. But now I'd like to kick it over to Kia. And so looking at what Melissa just said, you know, what can we do here in the United States? What are some resources and what are some tips that we as veterans, and especially as leaders in our community, what should we be doing?
All right. Well, thank you, Emily. And I just want to thank you all for your service before I get started. But as veterans, the first thing that you should do and encourage your friends and family to do is to make a plan. So that means deciding how you would like to vote this election cycle. There's no one best way to vote. It's really a matter of picking the one that you feel is the easiest and most comfortable for you. So if that's going to be voting by mail and requesting an absentee ballot or choosing to vote in person, we really need to be making a plan for how we're going to do that. If you are choosing to request an absentee ballot and vote by mail, I recommend requesting that ballot as soon as possible, just so there's enough time to get it sent to you and sent back. And then also, if there are any mistakes or things need to be corrected, you have some buffer time to get those handled before election day and don't have to wait to the last minute. If you're choosing to vote in person, I would highly, highly recommend to vote early. The more people that vote earlier and by mail, the less people we actually have voting on election day, which can just reduce a lot of the common problems like long lines and stuff that we see on election day. So I would definitely encourage you to do that. And then on top of all of that, choose a backup plan to your first plan. So if something happens with your absentee ballot for whatever reason, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I think it's too late for me to like send this back now. Decide if you're going to vote in person instead. If your original ballot is not counted, you can't get it back, whatever that reason may be. And then if something happens during early vote, like you may pick one day, I would suggest having a backup day or voting on the first possible day of early vote if you can. And a lot of states have mandatory Saturdays also, just for people who work Monday through Friday. That's a easier option for a lot of people. And then the second thing I would ask you to do after you've made a plan, encourage 5 people to do the same. Tell all your family, friends, and put it on social media. The next thing is to sign up to be a poll worker. There's been a national poll worker shortage since the beginning of COVID-19, mostly due to it being people mostly 60 plus who serve as poll workers who just don't want to necessarily get exposed, which they should not be. They should be at home. So we're really encouraging people who feel willing and able to sign up to be poll workers. It's a great way to make sure people's votes are cast, that people are getting the help on election day and before election day that they need. And it's just another way to serve your country. Um, and then the third thing, just as some more resources, if you have any questions about voting in your state, because I always say there's 50 different states and 50 different ways that we run elections, vote.org is an incredible resource for you all to utilize. It has information on what IDs you need to bring to the polls. Does your state even require you to bring an ID to the polls? It also has information on what are all your voter registration deadlines, because most states, it's coming up on October 5th, but there are also a lot of states like California that will allow you to register on election day. So it gives you really helpful information on exactly what you can do to your state, in your state, and what the rules are. And then the second one, if you know people who don't have access to internet, you don't want to fool with the internet, there's also a nonpartisan voter protection hotline, and you can call it at 866 our vote. And to spell it out, it's 866-687-8683, and I believe that's being put in the chat for y'all to see. That's also an incredible resource if you want to call because you're on your way to your polling location, but you're like, I don't know where it is. You can call and they can give you exact information with your address and where your voting location is. Any guidelines for your state. If you have any questions leading up to an election day, you've sent in your absentee ballot request and now you want to vote in person. How do you make sure you can do that? And all those resources. And then you can also sign up with VFAI, which I would highly encourage you to do to be a poll worker, which is powerthepolls.vfai.org. Because we definitely need the most amount of poll workers that we can have this election season, especially in the wake of COVID-19. And those are all the resources that I have for y'all to get involved in this election cycle. If you're interested in any other voter resources, you can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter at Fair Fight Action, because we are always updating with the most up-to-date resources for everything voting.
Awesome. Thank you, Kia. It's really important information, and especially to make a plan, during COVID and a backup plan. It's a really important reminder to all of us, listening in. Thanks of those of you who are attending, as well as our Facebook Live people who are watching. And so, knowing kind of all of that information, I'd love to kick it over to you, Steve. You have just dedicated your entire life to service. You've spent 25 years in the Army, and now you run an organization dedicated to protecting the Constitution. And so I was just wondering if you could just speak a little bit as to why you care so much about democracy and elections and the First Amendment.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Emily. It's really an honor to join everybody here today. And I can say that Kia's backup plan should resonate with all the vets out there, because we're always about having a backup plan, right? No plan survives first contact with the enemy. And sometimes the enemy just can be our life or the environment, right? And so I love the comments that both Melissa and Kia have already contributed. When I came into the Army, as an officer out of West Point, there was a line of thinking about officers in particular in terms of how we considered our oath to the Constitution. And everybody swears an oath, but this was a deliberate just look at what our particular role was in that. And back historically during World War II, when George C. Marshall was Chief of Staff of the Army, it was anathema for officers to even vote. that was considered casting your allegiance to either a party or a particular individual. And so while I was in service in uniform, I did not vote. I was not a member of I was a member early on in my career, and then I just disenrolled from the political party that I was a member of. Because I just really, even back then, and I can't believe it's been that long, but back then, the acrimony between the parties wasn't interesting to me. And it didn't matter who was elected from my perspective. I was sworn to the Constitution, and I would carry out the lawful orders of our elected officials in the service of our country and to take care of our men and women in uniform. So fast forward to Iraq, and I spent 40 months in Iraq over the course of about 7 years. And I came home from Baghdad in 2007 on R&R. My family was living in Germany, and my son was performing in a Holocaust play at the time. It was about the life of Eva Geringer Schloss, who her mother actually ended up marrying Anne Frank's father after the war. They were neighbors in the Netherlands before they got sent to the concentration camps. And my son's character was a Nazi youth. And he was not even able to practice, to rehearse his lines in public because it was against the law in Germany at the time. And his character was meant to shock the audience. It was meant to remind us of this really ugly history from that time frame. And I remember thinking about it and then realizing that I was seeing some of that same human drama play out in Baghdad, across Iraq. It was this state-sponsored campaign of sectarian cleansing in many areas. And it was, we were taking men and women in uniform and putting them along those fault lines to prevent the warring parties from committing atrocities against each other's civilian population. And I thought, how brilliant that the founding fathers, while they created these aspirational ideas that are in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, but they recognized the frailty of human nature in the sense that we might never live up to those aspirations. But I think as veterans, the thing that resonates with us is it's all in the striving, right? It's in the journey. It's what is our role in that process to help bridge the divides. And when I look around at the rhetoric in our country here now, it reminds me of, it mirrors some of the things I heard in Iraq during a civil war. It's not pretty. And we have what Arthur Brooks, who was the former president of American Enterprise Institute, called rhetorical dope peddlers. Whether they're politicians, whether they're media personalities, they are profiting from inciting that division. They're either making money on it or they're politically profiting from intentionally inciting division in our country. And so I think as veterans, we play a unique role because we actually have the possibility, given the high standing that the military has held in our public, whereas many other institutions have lost confidence amongst the public. We can walk into both conservative and progressive circles and at least have a bit of legitimacy to have a conversation. We can be perceived as nonpartisan because of our service. And that's what I try very hard to do and promote at First Amendment Voice is how do we create the space to have civil discourse and not spectacles like we watched on television the other night, because we need that. People want to hear it. They're tired of the constant attacks on institutions. And so there are a lot of things that vets can do. They can encourage people to get to know their candidates better so people can make more informed choices at the polls. And that's at all levels of governance, right? I know at the city level, sometimes it's hard to know unless you really make a concerted effort. There can be a lot of people running. We promote media literacy and helping people understand the bias that's out there in the media landscape and tools that they can use to make sense if they're questioning what to believe and what not to believe. And so I think veterans play a unique role, and their leadership that they bring to the community enables them to do things like not only join the initiative to become a poll worker, but write letters to the editor of your local newspaper, talk to your neighbors, host gatherings where you're just educating people about what's going on, or get involved, run for office or join the school board, be involved in your community in constructive ways. And I know for a lot of veterans, they're already doing that. I call it preaching to the choir a lot of times, but we all need to be inspired, right? Sometimes you can get down. And so inspiration is really the key, I think, is keep working together and having conversations like this one that you're teeing up right now. And we can overcome the obstacles that we face. So thanks, Emily.
Yeah, that's a really great reminder on there are so many different ways to get involved, and it's so important to keep yourself educated. And so again, please feel free to use the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen if you have any questions or comments or concerns or anything at all. But we do have one that I think, Melissa, you would be great to answer. And so thinking about what are the consequences if we do not challenge our institutions when they go awry? Shouldn't they just naturally snap back?
Great, thanks, Emily. And if it's okay, can I start off with just a comment, sort of adding on to something that Steve said? Great, it actually relates, the institution sort of being media and information. That I think that it's important for all of us to recognize, even though we know this, but to keep it in front of us that right now that there is information out there that people are putting out there not to help us, but the information is being put out to cause trouble, to, hurt people. And so if, keeping that filter on and realizing that some of the information that's coming at us is not intended to help, that social media is an attention economy, that, information that is promoted because it gets a lot of engagement. That might mean that a lot of people are angry about it. It doesn't mean it's true. So when you Google something and the first thing that comes up, might be completely false. And so I think it's important for us to keep that in mind, and to be sharing that with our families and with our friends, and just, helping those that we know to understand that the way that our media works is not always helpful. So that's one institution that we can be helping to correct. And in general, yes, this is an excellent question that, what happens if we don't hold our institutions to account? That's when we start to see a deterioration of trust, which is, again, that glue that keeps our democracy together. And for me, I've been monitoring a few countries that, overseas, where we've seen this happening for the past 10 years. So we've seen it happen over time, where there are fewer and fewer independent judges, or fewer and fewer independent media outlets. And you just see that then the population knows that it cannot trust the decisions of its bodies. And you then deteriorate into, those who agree with the decision and those who disagree with the decision just fighting with each other. And that doesn't do anybody any good. And so that's why it's important for all of us to hold our institutions to high standards now, to hold them to high standards when we see something that, we're not sure is right, to really be investigating and thinking about that up front, to maintain that trust.
And if I could just emphasize that point you just made, Melissa, is so important about technology, and I call it digital addiction. We actually have a program we call Digital Detox. If you're concerned about your own digital addiction, these things have been intentionally engineered to steal our time, our attention. They are engineered to consume who we are, but also many of the media organizations and personalities are trying to get that attention by pushing our emotional triggers, right? Pushing our emotional buttons, because that's what tends to grab interest. And I absolutely am confident that the closer we get to election day, we will see more and more of that traffic, whether it's on Facebook, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on the nightly news. There will be intentional efforts to trigger us and to cause confusion about what we believe, so that maybe we're not sure about how we're going to cast our vote. And so back to Kia's point of have a plan, have a backup, but be ready to execute, because there will be a lot of friction on the road to election day.
Yeah, great points by both. We have a couple more questions coming in. And so, Kia, to you, I just lost it. What should we do if we see people harassing voters on election day? Should we get involved?
So, if you have not been trained, my answer to that is no. However, if this is something that you're interested in preventing, Lawyers Committee and Common Cause have teamed up to run an incredible nonpartisan voting rights field protection program. Everyone who goes through that program is trained on how to de-escalate situations, what the rules are by state and county, because what I don't want to happen is if you try to do the right thing, not knowing that it's illegal in your state and not having been properly trained. But we need more outside poll observers. So I would 100% recommend that if this is something you're interested in monitoring and preventing, that you go through a vetted, nonpartisan voting rights organization to do so. And I saw that Kara just put it in the chat to the link for you all to go to sign up and do that.
Yeah, great. We actually had somebody in the chat recommend it, one of the attendees. So a great resource and a great answer. For you, Steve, this question looks like it'd be good for you. What do you think about veterans getting involved in politics today?
So I think it's a challenging space for anybody getting involved in politics. Veterans are uniquely positioned to do it in a balanced way, I think, in many cases. However, that is really difficult. The middle is getting crowded out as we become more polarized. And so it's got to be a personal choice. I definitely think veterans have a lot to offer as candidates, both to the conversation, even if they don't get elected, as well as when they do get elected. And so I think it's a good thing in general, but it needs to be a thought out decision with you and your family, because you are definitely exposing yourself to potential attacks. And some of it can be physical, that's going on out there against candidates and people just serving in government positions that aren't even elected, are having picketing outside of their home when their kids are trying to leave for school and things like that, because of the polarized environment. So it's something that I think you need to be deliberately or go in with your eyes open about.
A great point, and that kind of segues into another question that we have, talking about the divisiveness and how polarized our country is now. Aren't we more effective together? How can we come together in our town or region to act effectively? I'll open that up to everybody on the panel.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Oh, go ahead, Kia, please.
Go ahead, Steve. I'm still thinking.
We try to engender that in First Amendment voice. I know Veterans for American Ideals does that as well. And it's absolutely a great point. And I think the role, I guess the way I was trying to characterize the veterans' role is you are able to bring people together in your communities across the ideological spectrum many times. And that's really difficult to find in some environments across the country now. I know personally here in where I'm at in California, we have a very divided city, and it's been dysfunctional because our mayor had to leave for another job. And so we've had 2 and 2 on both sides of the council and nothing getting done. And everybody has gotten fed up with that situation, no matter where they stand. And so the current cast of candidates have gotten that message loud and clear that they need to go in with a mindset to work together. And I think veterans are uniquely positioned to be able to do that. But I agree with the point. It's right. We were founded on the idea of e pluribus unum, right? Out of many, one. And that's something that we should strive for.
And then I'll take on a little bit about that too. But first, I want to reiterate on a last point. To be an outside poll observer, you do not have to be a lawyer. They train you on everything you need to know. I have done it before. I am by no means a lawyer. And I knew everything that I was supposed to do and what I couldn't do to be really effective on election day last year. Well, in June, but feels like last year. So and then also just for like stuff that you can do regionally or locally, the one thing I would recommend, and it differs by state, but most places have some sort of governing board for like a region or county in your state. Here in Georgia, they're called boards of elections, and they're called those in most places too. And they are the ones who decide which polling places are open and closed, like where are they geographically and are they racially like diverse neighborhoods and all that great stuff. That's something that's really important to monitor and watch because they have a lot of power locally to decide how money that is allocated towards elections is dispersed throughout the county or the state. And so I would encourage people to definitely attend those, find out how your state runs that elections and like monitor it leading up to election day. Because sometimes, especially with COVID, like stuff happens. Like recently, UGA, I'm sure y'all saw on the news, decided they weren't going to have a polling location for students on campus. And they had to lobby that local boards of elections to make sure that they could still have a voting location. So leading up to election day, I think there's a lot of local rallying in towns and cities that still may need to be done. And that usually starts with your local board of election.
Yeah, I have another question for you, Kia, from somebody. Just talking about barriers that you could overcome. Are there efforts in states that have had natural disasters to help people vote who have been displaced?
Yes. So this is why when COVID first started and still now, we have been advocating so much to keeping in-person polling locations open, but also this is why you've been hearing people advocating for no excuse absentee ballots, just because we know people have moved or just have been displaced by natural disasters, and it always just happens that election season and hurricane season happen around the same time. We've experienced this before, and so one, there's like a lot of people trying to figure out where they are and doing direct outreach to them. But then two, just simply making sure that people know how to request their vote by mail ballot. And that natural disasters are an excuse if you've been displaced to receive that absentee ballot. And making sure we're just pushing as much information as possible on that, because that's just going to be our number one way to ensure that people can still vote in that election cycle. And then,
is there a place online that they can go specifically to look those up?
I will have to get those to you because the organization doing it is not coming to the top of my head right now. But I can send that to you so you can make sure everybody gets it.
Great, great. And so we had another question that I think would be great for you, Melissa. How can we differentiate between reliable and unreliable sources of information, especially now when it's so up in the air?
Yeah, and just to reiterate, there are studies that show that we tend to share like more false information than true information ahead of elections. It's kind of because there's so much out there. This tends to be a problem. So good to be thinking about this. And I would say, you know, a couple of guideposts, and I'm sure other folks will have some suggestions. I would say first, when you are first read the thing that you are thinking of sharing, the headline might sound good, but it might be misleading. And so when you actually open the file and read it, you might realize, oh, this is not what the headline says. So just make sure that you read it. Number two, when you read it, just notice your own reaction. Because if, as you're reading, you are getting really angry or you're feeling a lot of emotions, then this is what Steve was talking about. You know, sometimes there are, you know, stories, there are items that are put out there just to grab on our emotions. But then also, number three, note that disinformation, and when I say disinformation, I mean information that is intentionally false, put out there to try to manipulate us, it tends to have a kernel of truth in it. So that's why it can be difficult. It's often based on some true statement or story, and then it's warped and changed. So I would say, you know, look at the sourcing. This is a lot of analysis, I know, but we just need to be, essentially it's us trying to, you know, use common sense at all times, even when we're really upset and really mad at something that happened that day. So look at the sourcing, you know, does it seem like there's balanced sourcing? Does it seem like the sources are from entities that seem reliable? Have you seen anything else about this? You know, if a story is reported and it sounds really outlandish, this happened to me just the other day. And so, you know, you start to look at whether there are maybe other stories about the same thing. So yeah, we just have to be really careful during this time. Those are some thoughts.
Yeah, that's great. Really good to, as a great reminder, just to do your research, you know, and just make sure you are really reading what you are promoting out there, because it's all of our responsibilities. You know, we all play a role in the protection of our democracy. And so that's a great reminder. Thank you, Melissa. So we have another really interesting question. Why isn't Hollywood more productive in presenting a kind of overarching history as to what has happened in other countries as they approached this place we find ourselves at now? And so thinking about that, you know, do you think the media, celebrities, Hollywood, you know, is there, especially now, is there a responsibility for them to get involved?
I'm going to say yes, only because they just reach an audience that isn't on a mainstream level, right? Like they don't turn on news every night. Like they're not reading their local newspapers, and it's like mostly young people. And I think they reach that really important audience. And I think democracy is something that we're all responsible for. Like I think from like the average everyday citizen to like your most popular celebrity to like all of our elected officials, like we all play a huge role in it. And so I think celebrities like reach a really important audience that isn't always talked to or like reached. And I've seen, especially this election, like a lot of them reaching out, like wanting to know, okay, how do I promote accurate information? What do you need me to do? Like, do I need to do an Instagram live, like telling all my followers to go vote and how to go vote and making sure that they have those accurate resources? And I think it's sometimes like we can tell them all day, but it always takes that like one right person to reach a completely new audience that just always isn't involved in our electoral process. And I really don't think this process works unless every single person is participating. And I think that's where celebrity cultures in Hollywood kind of play a really important role.
I would add, actually, Chris Evans, Captain America, Chris Evans, started an organization called A Starting Point not too long ago. And it's all about trying to bring Republicans and Democrats together, current elected officials in the Senate and Congress, to discuss their give their points of view on a different topic, whatever it happens to be. And so, there are celebrities out there that I think are trying to help push back against the polarization and some of the confusion that's swirling out there. So, good question.
Great answer. Yeah. And so, kind of just rounding around and thinking about final thoughts, I just want to ask each of you to just kind of go into, why do elections matter? Why does protecting our democracy, why is it so important? And why are veterans so important in that equation? I'll start with you, Melissa. Why don't you go ahead and kick us off?
Okay, great. Elections are the foundational institution of democracy. When you see people out in the streets in places like Belarus and Venezuela and so many other countries, it's because they feel they haven't been able to participate in their government in elections. And so, that's what they are striving for. And it's something that we have. And so we need to protect it and guard it. And veterans are looked to with such respect, as Steve has said earlier, because you all have signed up to protect that overseas, protect our democracy, and also to work with those that you meet overseas to help them in promoting their own democracy. And so you are voices of reason and of calm. And so people will be looking to you for leadership, and I hope that you can help them, navigate through this tough time as we deal with polarization ahead of an election, to really pull this off and show that we can promote fairness in a tough time.
Great answer. Yeah, Kia, can you answer?
Yeah, so I'm not a veteran, so I'll take my granddad, who is a Korean War veteran's answer. And he always used to say, I fought for this country to have democracy, so best believe I'm participating in it every time I get to, because he truly felt that he was overseas fighting for all these people to have democracy, and it's just such a touchstone of our country. That it's so important. And right now, quite frankly, it needs protecting. It needs veterans like y'all to help us protect it, to help us fight for it and uplift it now more than ever. So like we said earlier, sign up to be a poll worker, sign up to be a poll observer, make a plan to vote. Because this is just another piece of service that we're all asking y'all to do right now.
So true. And so, Steve, why do elections matter, and why do veterans play such an important part in it?
Well, the First Amendment has a lot of complexity to it. It's freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom to assemble and petition the government for grievance. But voting is the most fundamental element of free expression. It's how you are letting your elected officials know where you stand, and it's holding them accountable as well if you don't vote for them because you didn't like the performance. And so it's fundamental that we protect our elections and that we ensure the integrity of the elections. And so we should be pushing back against ideas that are undermining those. Veterans can play a huge role, and I would broaden that beyond veterans. I know my wife has been a poll worker numerous times in our town, and we all have friends and family that we can encourage as well. So it can be that team effort approach, right? And veterans are used to operating in teams, and so we can encourage others to join us when we go to the polls, whether it's as a worker or casting our vote, or just asking our friends, hey, do you have a plan on how you're going to vote? So there are so many ways we can be involved and contribute And it can be done in a virtual space like we're doing now, right? If some of the folks we're reaching out to are concerned about the virus, which is a major concern for so many people because of the lethality. And so it's really important. I would like to just mention, I saw Mr. Umshad sent in a follow-on question there, and the resources on questioning or determining what's authentic in pictures, and I would offer also in videos, are under development. I don't have them off the top of my head, but I would definitely search for some of the things. I don't know, Melissa might have an answer to that, but it's something that a lot of people are very concerned about with deep fakes and other ways to manipulate technology in order to convince us to believe something that might not be true. So it's a really good question, and it's something that I think we'll continue to grapple with as a country as we work through this technological revolution that we're experiencing. So I'll just leave it at that and turn it back to you, Emily.
Yeah, Melissa, did you want to add anything?
I think Steve is right that in terms of, judging deep fakes, we're still seeing a lot of development there. I think Clint Watts is a good person to follow. I follow on Twitter, whatever social media. He's part of the DFR lab at Atlantic Council. And so I would, check him out in terms of debunking deep fakes. He's one place to start. Bellingcat also does a really good job, but they do focus on more Russian disinformation, which is kind of my angle. But they do a really good job, and so are developing the technology.
Yeah, great. Those are great resources. And before I kick it over to Christopher Purdy, who is the project manager at VFAI, I just really want to comment on something that Steve said. We all have a responsibility to preserve our republic, and we all have a responsibility to not let just a few people carry that burden. We all have to rise up, especially now, especially during this time. And one of the best ways you can do that is to be a poll worker. And so VFAI, we have launched an opportunity for you if you've already registered to vote and you're looking to do more, how to do more. And so I'd love to kick it over to Chris to kind of give a little bit more of an explanation to our Power the Polls program.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. I have come off camera. My bandwidth apparently is not very good. So if I start lagging, Emily will send me a nasty Slack message and I will go back off camera and keep talking. But I, just want to thank all of our panelists for joining this webinar today. It's very informative, and I'm just so grateful to have such smart and dedicated patriots come out and speak on this this effort. And also thank you to Emily for moderating this. You're doing a great job, and I really appreciate it. And our intern Kara in the background feeding questions has just been fantastic. But I do want to plug the Vets Power the Polls program. So it's been mentioned a bunch of times. The biggest thing that we need right now in this era of COVID, and with kind of threats to the sanctity of our election system, we need people to sign up and serve their communities. We as veterans have put on our uniform in the past, and we answered the call of our country because we believed in something that's greater than ourselves. And we're asking you to do that again. And it's a big thing. It's a long day, but our sacrifice is going to be worth it. If you can't do it, if there's some timing conflicts, or you're just not sure about if that's something you really want to do, we are on the verge of launching a secondary kind of ancillary project where we're going to encourage people to go out on election day, vets, non-vets alike, and just kind of cheer on their supporters or cheer on the voters, and just be uplifting your community as they go out and take part in this historic election. And so, we'd ask you to sign up at the Power of the Polls.vfai.org site anyways. And so we can contact you and you can be up to date with the most recent updates on that. So again, the website is powerthepolls.vfai.org. I'm sure someone has put that in the chat already, but I just appreciate every one of you who has participated today and signed up. Democracy is a participation sport, and we can get through this rough time that we're all in together. So with that, I'll stop rambling and let Emily close it out. Thanks all.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. A great reminder as to what we can do. So again, we just want to thank our panelists. We want to thank you for attending, and for those of you that watched on Facebook Live. And we'll just go out there and be there November 3rd, and make sure we protect our democracy. So thanks everybody for joining, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.